In this video, I'm going to continue on reading from Ralph Waldo Emerson's essays. I'm currently on page 635. Right now, we're reading about British universities and colleges. That's what we're reading about right now. It's in the essay called English Traits, page 635. Please feel free to leave your comments, your thoughts, your feedback, your insights. Please like or dislike this video. Please press the emoji for a like or dislike. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join me as I read this amazing book. I'm going to continue on. The diet and rough exercise secure a certain amount of Old Norse power. A fop will fight, and an exigent circumstance will play the manly part. In seeing these youths, I believe, I saw already an advantage in vigor and color and general habit over their contemporaries in the American colleges. No doubt, much of the power and brilliancy of the reading men is merely constitutional or hygienic. With hardier habit and resolute gymnastics, with 5 miles more walking, or 5 ounces less eating, or with a saddle and a gallop of 20 miles a day, with skating and rowing matches, the American would arrive at a robust exegesis and cherry and hilarious tone. I should readily concede these advantages, which it would be easy to acquire if I did not find also that they read better than we, and write better. English, while falling on their school and university training, makes a systematic reading of the best authors, and to the end of a knowledge how the things whereof they treat really stand. Whilst pamphleter or journalists reading for an argument for a party, or reading to write, or at all events for some by end imposed on them, must read meanly and fragmentarily. Charles I, self-respect, set bounds to serfdom and slavery, founded library, created religious architecture, York, Newstead, Westminster, Fountains Abbey, Ripon, Beverley and Dundee, works to which the key is lost with the sentient which created them, inspired the English Bible, the liturgy, the monkish histories, the chronicle of Richard of Devizes. The priest translated the Vulgate and translated the sanctions of old hagiology into English virtues on English ground. It was a certain affirmative of aggressive state of the Caucasian race. Man awoke refreshed by the sleep of ages. The violence of the northern savages exasperated Christianity into power. It lived by the love of the people. Bishop Wilfrid manumitted 250 serfs whom he found attached to the soil. The clergy obtained respite from labor for the poor on the Sabbath and on church festivals. Quote, the Lord who compelled his poor to labor between sunset on Saturday and sunset on Sunday forfeited him altogether. End quote. The priest came out of the people and sympathized with his class. Church was the mediator, check and democratic principle. In Europe, Latimer Wycliffe, Arundel Cobham, Anthony Parsons, Sir Harry Vane, George Fox Penn, Bunyan are the Democrats as well as the saints of their time. The Catholic Church, thrown on the toiling, serious people, has made in 14 centuries a massive system close fitted to the manners and genius of the country, at once domestical and stately. In a long time, it has blended with everything in heaven above and the earth beneath. It moves through a zodiac of feasts and fasts, names every day of the year, every town and market and healand and monument, and has coupled itself with an almanac that no court can be held, no field ploughed, no horse shod without some leave from the church. No maxims of prudence or shop or farm are fixed and dated by the church, hence its strength in agriculture districts. The distribution of land into the parishes enforces a church sanction to every civil privilege, and the gradation of the clergy prelates to the rich and curates for the poor, with the fact that a classical education has been secured to the clergyman, makes them, quote, the link which unites the sequestered peasantry with the intellectual advancement of the age, end quote. The English Church has many certificates to show of humble, effective service in humanizing the people, in cheering and refining men, feeding, healing, and educating, as a seal of martyrs and confessors. The noblest books, a sublime architecture, a ritual marked by the same secular merits, nothing cheap or purchasable. From the slow-grown church, important reactions proceed. Much for culture, much for giving a direction to the nation's affection and will to do. The carved and pictured chapel, its entire surface animated, the image and emblem, made the parish church a sort of book and Bible to the people's eye. Then, when the Saxon instinct had secured a service in the vernacular tongue, it was the tutor and university of the people. In York Minster, on the day of the enthronization of the new archbishop, I heard the service of evening prayer read and chanted the choir. It was strange to hear the pretty pastoral of the betrothal of Rebecca and Isaac. It was strange to hear the pretty pastoral of the betrothal of Rebecca and Isaac in the morning of the world, read with circumstantiality in York Minster on the 13th January 1848, to the decorous English audience, just fresh from the Times newspaper and their wine, and listening with all the devotion of national pride that was binding old and new to some purpose. The reverence for the scriptures is an element of civilization, for thus has the history of the world been preserved, and is preserved. Here in England, every day a chapter of Genesis and a leader in the times. Another part of the same service on this occasion was not insignificant. Handel's coronation anthem, God Save the King, was played by Dr. Kimmage on the organ. With sublime effect, the minister and the music were made for each other. It was a hint of the part of the church. It was a hint of the part of the church plays as a political engine. From his infancy, every Englishman is accustomed to hear daily prayers for the Queen, for the royal family, and the Parliament by name. And this lifelong consecration cannot be without influence on his opinions. The universities are also a parcel of the ecclesiastical system, and the first design is to form the clergy. Thus, the clergy for 1,000 years have been the scholars of the nation. The national temperament deeply enjoys the unbroken order and tradition of its church. The liturgy, ceremony, architecture, the sober grace, the good company, the connection with the throne and with history, which adorn it, and whilst it endears itself thus to men of more taste than activity, the stability of the English nation is passionately enlisted to its support from its inextricable connection with the cause of public order, with politics, and with the funds. Good churches are not built by bad men. At least there must be probity and enthusiasm somewhere in the society. These minsters were neither built nor filled by atheists. No church has had more learned, industrious, or devoted men. Plenty of, quote, clerks and bishops who out of their gowns would turn their backs on the man. End quote. The architecture still glows with faith in immortality. Heats and genial periods arrive in history, or shall we say, plenitudes of divine presence, by which high tides are caused in the human spirit, and great virtues and talents appear, as in the 11th, 12th, 13th, and again in the 16th and 17th centuries, when the nation was full of genius and piety. By the age of the Wycliffes, Cobhams, Arundels, Beckets, of the Latimers, Moores, Kramers, of the Taylors, Leightons, Herberts, of the Sherlocks and Butlers is gone. Silent revolutions, in opinion, have made it impossible that men like these should return or find a place in their own sacred stalls. The spirit that dwelt in this church has glided away to animate other activities, and they who come to the old shrines find apes and players rustling old garments. The religion of England is part of good breeding. When you see on the continent well-dressed Englishmen come into his ambassador's chapel and put his face for silent prayer into his smooth-brushed hat, you cannot help feeling how much national pride prays with him, and the religion of a gentleman. So far is he from attaching any meaning to the words, that he believes himself to have done almost the generous thing, and that it is very condescending in him to pray to God. A great duke said on the occasion of a victory in the House of Lords that he thought the Almighty God had not been well used by them, and that it would become their magnanimity after so great success to take over, that a proper acknowledgement be made. It is the church of the gentry, but it is not the church of the poor. The operatives do not own it, and gentlemen lately testified in the House of Commons that in their lives they never saw a poor man in a ragged coat inside a church. The tepidity on the side of religion of the vigorous English understanding shows how much wit and folly can agree in one brain. Their religion is a quotation, their church is a doll. And an examination is interdicted with screams of terror. In good company, you expect them to laugh at the fanaticism of the vulgar, but they do not. They are the vulgar. The English has come perhaps with Christendom in the 19th century. Do not respect power, but only performance. Value ideas only for an economic result. Wellington esteems a saint only as far as he can be any chaplain. Mr. Briscoe, by his admirable conduct and good sense, got the better of Methodism, which has appeared among the soldiers and once among the officers. Unquote. They value a philosopher as they value an apothecary who brings bark or a trench. An inspiration is only some blowpipe or a finer mechanical aid. I suspect that there is in an Englishman's brave. I beg your pardon. I'll repeat that. I suspect that there is in an Englishman's brain a valve that can be closed at pleasure, as an engineer shuts off steam. The most sensible and well-informed men possess the power of thinking just so far as the bishop in religious matters, and as the chancellor as an exchequer in politics. They talk with courage and logic, and show you magnificent results. But the same men who have brought free trade in geology to their present standing look grave and lofty and shut down the valve as soon as the conversation approaches the English church. After that, you talk with a box turtle. The action of the university, both in what is taught and in the spirit of the place, is erected more on producing an English gentleman than a saint or a psychologist. It ripens a bishop and extrudes a philosopher. I do not know that there is more cabalism as in the Anglican than in other churches, but the Anglican clergy are identified with the aristocracy. They say that if you talk with a clergyman, you are sure to find him well-bred, informed, and candid. He entertains you. He entertains your thought or your project with sympathy and praise. But if a second clergyman come in, their sympathy is at an end. Two together are inaccessible to your thoughts. And whenever it comes to action, the clergyman invariably sides with the church. The Anglican Church is marked by the grace and good sense of its forms, by the manly grace of its clergy. The gospel it preaches is, by taste are ye saved. It keeps the old structures in repair, spends a world of money in music and building, and in buying pagan and architectural literature, and has a general good name for amenity and mildness. It is not in ordinary a persecuting church. It is not inquisitorial, not even inquisitive. It is perfectly well bred and can shut its eyes in all proper occasions. If you let it alone, it will let you alone. But its instinct is hostile to all change in politics, literature, or social arts. The Church has not been the founder of the London University, of the Mechanics Institute, of the Free School, or whatever aims at the fusion of knowledge. The Platonists of Oxford are as bitter against this heresy as Thomas Taylor. The doctrine of the Old Testament is the religion of England. The first leaf of the New Testament it does not open. It believes in a providence which does not treat with levity a pound sterling. They are neither transcendentalists nor Christians. They put up no Socratic prayer, much less any saintly prayer for the Queen's mind. Ask neither for light nor light, but say bluntly, quote, grant her in health and wealth long to live, end quote. And one traces this Jewish prayer in all English private history, from the praise of King Richard and Richard of Devizes, chronicled to those in the diaries of Sir Samuel Romilly and of Haydn the painter. Quote, abroad with my wife, end quote, writes Papias piously. Quote, the first time that ever I rode in my own coach, which do make my heart rejoice and praise God and pray him to bless it to me and continue it, end quote. The bill for the naturalization of the Jews in 1753 was resisted by petitions from all parts of the kingdom and by petition from the city of London, reprobating this bill as, quote, tending extremely to the dishonor of the Christian religion and extremely injurious to the interests and commerce of the kingdom in general and of the city of London in particular, end quote. But they have not been able to congeal humanity by act of parliament. Quote, the heavens journey still and sojourn not, end quote. And arts, wars, discoveries, and opinions go onwards at their own pace. The new age has new desires, new enemies, new trades, new charities, and reads the scriptures with new eyes. The chatters of French politics, the steam whistle, the hum of the mill, and the noise of embarking emigrants had quite put most of the old legends out of mind, so that when you came to read the liturgy to a modern congregation, it was almost absurd in its unfitness and suggested a masquerade of old customs. No chemist has prospered in the attempt to crystallize a religion. It is endogenous, like the skin and other vital organs. A new statement every day. The prophet and apostle know this, and the nonconformist confutes the conformist by quoting the text they must allow. It is the condition of a religion to require religion for its expositor. The prophet and apostolate can only be rightly understood by prophet and apostolate. The statesman knows that the religious element will not fail any more than the supply of fibrin and chyle, but it is in its nature constructive and will organize such a church as it wants. The wise legislator will spend on temples, schools, libraries, colleges, will shun the enriching of priests. If in any manner he can leave the election and paying of the priest to the people, he will do well. Like the Quakers, he may resist the separation of a class of priests and create opportunity and expectation in the society to meet natural endowment in this kind. But when wealth accrues to a chaplaincy, a bishopric, a rectorship, it requires moneyed men for its stewards, who will give it another direction than to the mystics of their day. Of course, money will do after its kind and will steadily work to unspiritualize and unchurch the people to whom it was bequeathed. The class certain to be excluded from all preferment of the religious are driven to other churches, which is nature's vis medicatrix. The curates are ill paid, and the prelates are overpaid. This abuse draws into the church of the children of the nobility and other unfit persons who have a taste for expense. Thus a bishop is only supplice merchant. Thus a bishop is only a supplice merchant. Through his lawn I can see the bright buttons of the shopman's coat glitter. A wealth like that of Durham makes almost a premium on felony. Brougham, in a speech in the House of Commons on the Irish elective franchise, said, quote, how will the reverend bishops how will the reverend bishops of the other houses be able to express their due abhorrence of the crime of perjury, who solemnly declare in the presence of God that when they are called upon to accept a living, perhaps of £4,000 a year, at that very instant they are moved by the Holy Ghost to accept the office and administration thereof, and for no other reason whatever, end quote. And for no other reason whatever, end quote. The modes of initiation are more damaging than custom house oaths. The bishop is elected by the dean and prebends of the cathedral. The queen sends these gentlemen a conge d'elire, or leave to elect. But also sends them the name of the person whom they are to elect. They go into the cathedral, chant and pray and beseech the Holy Ghost to assist them in their choice, and after their invocations invariably find the dictates of the Holy Ghost agree with the recommendations of the Queen. But you must pray for conformity. All goes well as long as you run with conformists. But you who are an honest man in other particulars, know that there is alive somewhere a man whose honesty reaches to this point, also that he shall not kneel to false gods. And on the day when you meet him, you sink into the class of counterfeits. Besides the succumbing his grave penalties. If you take in a lie, you must take in all that belongs to it. England accepts this ornamented national church, and it glazes the eyes, bloats the flesh, gives the voice a strenuous clang, and clouds the understanding of the receivers. The English church undermined by German criticism had nothing left but tradition, and was led logically back to Romanism. But that was an element which only let me start again. The English church, undermined by German criticism, had nothing left but tradition and was led logically back to Romanism, but that was an element which only hotheads could breathe. In view of the educated class, generally it was not a fact to front the sun, and the alienation of such men from the church became complete. Nature, to be sure, had her remedy. Religious persons are driven out of the established church into sects which instantly rise to credit and hold the establishment in check. Nature has sharper remedies also. The English, abhorring change in all things, abhorring it most in matters of religion, cling to the last rag of form, and are dreadfully given to cant. The English, and I wish it were confined to them, but it is a saint in the Anglo-Saxon blood in both hemispheres. The English and the American, the English and Americans can't, beyond all other nations. The French relinquish all that industry to them. What is so odious of the polite bows to God in our books and newspaper? What is so odious to the polite bows to God in our books and newspaper? The popular press is flagitious, flagitious, in the exact measure of its sanctimony, and the religions of the day is a theatrical Sinai, where the thunders are supplied by the property man. The fanaticism and hypocrisy created satire. Create satire. Punch finds an inexhaustible material. Dickens writes novels on external humanity. Thackeray exposes the heartless high life. Nature revenges herself more somberly by the heathenism of the lower classes. Lord Shaftesbury calls the poor thieves together and reads sermons to them, and they call it gas. George Borrows summons the gypsies to hear his discourse on the Hebrews in Egypt, and reads to them the Apostles' Creed in Romany. Quote, when I had concluded, quote, he says, quote, I looked around me. The features of the assembly were twisted, and the eyes of all turned upon me with a frightful squint. Not an individual present, but squinted. The genteel Peppa, the good humoured Chicarona, the caused me all squinted. The gypsy jockey squinted worst of all. The church at this moment is much to be pitied. She has nothing left but possession. If a bishop meets an intelligent gentleman and reads fatal interrogations in his eyes, he has no resource but to take wine with him. False position introduces cant, perjury, simony, and ever a lower class of mind and character into the clergy. And when the hierarchy is afraid of science and education, afraid of piety, afraid of tradition, afraid of theology, there's nothing left but to quit a church which is no longer one. But the religion of England is established. But the religion of England, is it the established church? No. Is it the sects? No. They are only perpetuations of some private man's descent, and are the established church as cabs are to a coach cheaper and more convenient, but really the same thing, but sparingly, not in a sentence made of Roman words alone, without loss of strength. The children and laborers use the Saxon unmixed. The Latin unmixed is abandoned to the colleges, and Parliament mixture is a secret of the English island. And in their dialect, the male principle is the Saxon, female the Latin, and they are combined in every discourse. A good writer, if he has indulged in a Roman roundness, makes haste to chasten a nervous period by English monosyllables. With the Gothic nation, when the Gothic nation came into Europe, they found it lighted with the sun and moon of Hebrew and Greek genius. The table of their reign, long kept in the dark, were finally sensible to the double glory, to the images from this twin source of Christianity and art. The mind became fruitful as by the incubation of the Holy Ghost. The English mind flowered in every faculty. The commonest sense was surprised and inspired. For 2 centuries, England was philosophic, religious, poetic. The mental furniture seemed of larger scale. The memory, capacious like the storehouse of the reins, the ardor and endurance of study, the boldness and facility of the mental construction, The fancy and imagination and easy spanning of vast distances of thought, the enterprises of accosting of new subjects, and generally the easy exertion of power astonished, like the legendary feats of Goliath of war. The union of Saxon precision and Oriental soaring, of which Shakespeare is the perfect example, is shared in less degree by the writers of 2 centuries. I find only the great masses out of all the rivalry and reach, but the whole writing of a time charged with a masculine force and freedom. There is hygienic simpleness, rough vigor, and closeness to the matter in hand, even in the second and third class of writers. And I think in the common style of the people, as one finds it in the citation of wills, letters, and public documents, in proverbs and forms of speech, the more hardy and studied expression may indicate that the savageness of the Norseman was not all gone. The dynamic brains hurled off their words as revolving stone hurls off scraps of words. I could cite from the 17th century sentences and phrases of edge not to be matched in the 19th. The poets, by simple force of mind, equalized themselves with accumulated science of ours. The country gentlemen had a posset or drink they called October, and the poets, as if by this hint, knew how to distill the whole season into their autumnal verses. And as nature, to pick the more, sometimes works up deformities into beauty in some rare Aspasia or Cleopatra. And as the Greek art wrought many a vase or column in which too long or too little of note or nodes or pits and flaws are made a beauty of, so these were so quick and vital that they could charm and enrich by means and vulgar objects. A man must think that age well taught and thoughtful, by which masques and poems, like those of Ben Jonson, full of heroic sentiment in a manly style, receive with favor. The unique fact in literary history, the unsurprised reception of Shakespeare, the reception proved by his making his fortune, and the apathy proved by the absence of all contemporary panegyric, seems to demonstrate an elevation in the mind of the people. Judge of the splendor of a nation by the insignificance of great individuals in it. The manner in which they learned Greek and Latin before our modern facilities were yet ready, without dictionaries, grammars, or indexes. By lectures of a professor followed by their own searchings, required a more robust memory, incorporation of all the faculties and their scholars, Camden, Usher, Selden, Meddy, Cateker, Hooker, Taylor, Burton, Bentley, Bryan, Walton acquired solidity and method of engineers. The influence of Plato tinges the British genius. Their minds loved analogy, were cognizant of resemblances, and climbers on the staircase of unity. It is a very old strife between those who like to see identity and those who elect to see discrepancies. And it renews itself in Britain. The poets, of course, are of one part, the men of the world of the other. But Britain had many disciples of Plato. More Hooker, Bacon, Sidney, Lord, Brooke, Herbert, Brown, Donne, Spencer, Chapman, Milton, Crashaw, Norris, Cudworth, Berkeley, Jeremy Taylor. Lord Bacon had the English duality. Lord Bacon has the English duality. His centuries of observations on useful science and his experiments, I suppose, were worth nothing but hint of Franklin or Watt or Dalton or Davy, or anyone who had a talent for experiments was worth all his lifetime of exquisite trifles. But he drinks of a diviner stream and marks the influx of idealism into England, with echoes Is poetry health and progress? The rules of its genesis or its diffusion are not known. That knowledge, if we had it, would supersede all that we call science of the mind. It seems in a fear of race or of metachemistry, the vital point being how far the sense of unity or instinct of seeking resemblance predominate. For wherever the mind takes a step, it is to put itself at one with a larger class, discern beyond the lesser class with which it has been conversant. Hence, all poetry and all affirmative action comes. Bacon is the structure of his mind, held of the analogists of the idealists, or as we popularly say, naming for the best example, Platonists. Whoever discredits analogy and requires heaps of facts before any theories can be attempted has no poetic power and nothing original or beautiful will be produced by him. Locke is as surely by the influx of decomposition and of prose as Bacon and Platonists of growth. The Platonic, the Platonic, the Platonic is the poetic tendency. The so-called scientific is the negative and poisonous. It is quite certain that Spencer, Burns, Byron, and Wordsworth will be Platonists, and that the dull men will be Lockists. Then politics and commerce will absorb from the educated class men of talents without genius, precisely because such have no resistance. Bacon capable of ideas, yet devoted to ends required in his map of the mind. First of all, universality, or prima philosophia, the receptacle for all such profitable observations and axioms as fall not within the compass of any of the special parts of philosophy, but are more common and of a higher stage. He held this element essential. It is never out of mind. He never spares rebukes for such neglect it. He held this element essential. It is never out of mind. He never spares rebukes for such as neglect it, believing that no perfect discovery can be made in a flat or level, but you must ascend to higher science. Could if any man thinketh philosophy and universality to be idle studies, he doth not consider that all professions are from thence served and sublimed, and this I take to be a great cause that has hindered the progression of learning, because these fundamental knowledges have been studied but in passage. Quote, end quote. He explained himself by giving various quaint examples of the summary of common law, of which each science has its own illustration. He complains that, quote, he finds this part of learning very deficient, the profoundest sort of wits, drawing a bucket now and then for their own use. But the spring had unvisited. This was the dry light which did scorch and offend most men watery natures, end quote. Plato had signified the same sense when he said, quote, all the great arts require a subtle and speculative research into the law of nature, since loftiness or thought and perfect mastery over every subject seem to be derived from some such source as this. The Pericles had, in addition to a great natural genius, through meeting with Anaxagoras, who was a person of this kind, he attached himself to him and nourished himself with sublime speculations on the absolute intelligence, and imported thence all the orational or rhetorical art, whatever could be useful to it. Unquote. A few generalizations always circulate in the world whose authors we do not rightly know, which astonish and appear to be avenues the vast kingdoms of thought. And these are in the world constants, like the Copernican and Newtonian theories in physics and in England. These may be traced usually to Shakespeare, Bacon, Milton, or Hooker, even to Van Helmont and Beeman, and all have a kind of filial retrospect to Plato and the Greeks. Of this kind is Lord Bacon's sentence that, quote, nature is commanded by obeying her, end quote. His action of poetry, which, quote, accommodates the shows of things to the desires of the mind, end quote. The Zoroastrian definition of poetry, mystical yet exact. Quote, apparent pictures of unapparent natures. End quote. Spencer's creed that, quote, soul is form and doth the body make, end quote, the theory of Berkeley that we have no certain assurance of the existence of matter. Dr. Samuel Clarke's argument for theism from the nature of space and time. Harrington's political rule that power must rest on a land, a rule which requires to be liberally interpreted. The theory of Swedenborg, so comically applied by him, that the man makes his heaven and hell. Hegel's study of civil history as the conflict of ideas and the victory of the deeper thought. The identity philosophy of Schelling, couched in a statement that, quote, all difference is quantitative, end quote. So the very announcement of the theory of gravitation, of Kepler's three harmonic laws, and even of Dalton's doctrine of definite proportions finds a sudden response in the mind which remains a superior evidence to empirical demonstrations. I cite these generalizations, some of which are more recent, merely to indicate a class, not these particulars, but the mental plane or the atmosphere from which they emanate was the home and element of the writers and readers in what we loosely call the Elizabethan age, say in literary history. Period from 1575 to 1625, yet a period almost short enough to justify Ben Jonson's remark, although Bacon, quote, about about his time, and within his view, were born all the wits that could honor a nation or help study, end quote. Such richness of genius has not existed more than once before. These heights could not be maintained as we find stumps of vast trees in our exhausted soils, and have received traditions of their ancient fertility to tillage. So history reckons epochs in which the intellect of famed races became effete. So it fared with English genius. These heights were followed by a meanness and a descent of the mind into lower levels. The loss of wings, no high speculation, lucky to whom the meaning of ideas was unknown, became the type of philosophy and its quote, understanding, unquote. Imagine all nations of the English intellect. His countrymen forsook the lofty sides of Parnassus. Sorry. In which they had once walked with echoing steps and discussed the studies once so beloved. The powers of thought fell into neglect. The later English want the faculty of Plato and Aristotle, so grouping men in natural classes by an insight of general law so deep that the rule is deduced with equal precision from few subjects or from one as from multitudes of lives. Shakespeare is supreme in that, as in all the great mental energies the Germans generalize, the English cannot interpret the German mind. The German science comprehends in English. The absence of the faculty in England is shown by the timidity which accumulates mountains of facts, as a bad general wants myriads of men and miles of redoubts to compensate the inspiration of courage and conduct. The English shrink from a generalization. Quote, they do not look abroad into universality, or they draw only a bucketful at the fountain of the first philosophy for their occasion, and do not go to the springhead. Unquote. Bacon, who said this, is almost unique among his countrymen in that faculty, at least among the prose writers. Milton, who is the steer or high table land to let down the English genius from the summits of Shakespeare, used this privilege sometimes in poetry, more rarely in prose. For a long interval afterwards, it is not found. Berkeley was addicted to generalizing, but this was a shorter line. As his thoughts have less depth, they have less compass. Holmes' abstractions are not deep or wise. He owes his fame to keen observation that no copula had been detected between any cause and effect, either in physics or in thought, and the term cause and effect was loosely, gratuitously applied to what we know only as consecutive, not at all as casual. Dr. Johnson's written abstractions have little value. The tone of feeling is them in them makes their chief worth. Mr. Hallam, a learned and elegant scholar, has written the history of European literature for 3 centuries, a performance of great ambition inasmuch as a judgment was to be attempted on every book. But his eye does not reach the ideal standards. The verdicts are all dated from London. All new thought must be cast into the old molds. The expansive element which creates literature is steadily denied. Plato is resisted, and his school, Hallam, is uniformly polite. But with deficient sympathy, writes with resolute generosity, but is consciousness of the deep worth which lies in the mystics, which often outvalues as a seat of power and a source of revolution all the correct writers and shining reputations of the day. He passes in silence or dismisses with a kind of contempt the profounder masses, a lover of ideas, not only uncongenial but unintelligible. Hallam inspires respect by his knowledge and fidelity, by his manifest love of good books, and he lifts himself to his own better than almost any the greatness of Shakespeare, and better than Johnson. He appreciates Milton, but in Hallam, or in the firm intellectual nerve of Mackintosh, one still finds the same type of English genius. It is wise and rich, but it lives on its own capital. It is retrospective. How can it discern and hail the new forms that are looming up on the horizon? New and gigantic thoughts which cannot dress themselves out of any old wardrobe of the past. The essays, the fiction, and the poetry of the day have to have the like municipal limits. Dickens, with preternatural apprehension of the language of manners and the varieties of street life, with pathos and laughter, with patriotic and still enlarging generosity, writes London tracts. He is a painter of English details, like Hogarth, local and temporary, in his tints and style, and local in his aims. Bulwer, an industrious writer with occasional ability, is distinguished for his reverence of intellect as a temporality, and appeals to the world's ambition of his students. His romances tend to fan these low flames. The novelist, the spear of the heart. Thackeray finds that God has made no allowance for the poor thing in this universe. More the pity, he thinks. But it is not for us to be wise. We must renounce ideals, and accept London. The brilliant Macaulay, who expresses the tone of the English governing classes of the day, explicitly teaches that good means good to eat, good to wear, material commodity, and the glory of modern philosophy in a direction, unquote, fruit, unquote, to yield economical inventions, and that its merit is to avoid ideas and avoid morals. He thinks in the distinctive merit of the Baconian philosophy in its triumph over the old Platonic is disentangling the intellect from theories of the all fair and all good, and pinning it down to making a better sick chair and a better wine way for an invalid. This not ironically, but in good faith, that quote solid advantage, unquote, as he calls it, meaning always sensual benefit is the only good. The eminent belief of astronomy is the better navigation it creates to enable the fruit ships to bring home their lemons and wine to London grocer. It was a curious result in which the civility and religion of England for 1,000 years ends in denying morals and reducing the intellect to a saucepan. The critic hides his skepticism under the English cant of practical. To convince the reason to touch the conscience is romantic pretension. The fine arts fall to the ground. Beauty, except as luxurious commodity, does not exist. It is very certain. I may say in passing that if Lord Bacon had been only the sensualist his critic pretends, he would never have acquired the fame which now entitles him to his patronage. It is because he had imagination. The leisures of the spirits embasked in an element of contemplation out of all modern English atmospheric gorges, that he is impressive to the imaginations of men, and has become potentate, not to be ignored. Sir David Brewster sees the high place of Bacon without finding Newton indebted to him, and thinks it a mistake. Bacon occupies it by specific gravity or levity, not by any feat he did, or by any tutoring more or less, Newton, etc., but as an effect of the same cause which showed itself more pronounced afterwards in Hooke, Boyle, and Halley. Coleridge, a Catholic mind with a hunger for ideas, with eyes looking before and after the highest bards and sages, and who wrote and spoke the only high criticism in his time, is one of those who save England from the reproach of no longer possessing the capacity to appreciate what rarest wit the island has yielded. Yet the misfortune of his life, his vast attempt but most inadequate performings, failing to accomplish any one masterpiece, seems to mark the closing of an era. Even in him, the traditional Englishman was too strong for the philosopher, and he fell into accommodations. And as Burke had striven to idealize the English state, so Coleridge narrowed his mind in an attempt to reconcile the Gothic rule of dogma. Of the Anglican Church with eternal ideas, but for Coleridge and a lurking, taciturn minority uttering itself in occasional criticism, oftener in private discourse. One would say that in Germany and in America is the best mind in England rightly respected. It is the surest sign of national decay. When the Brahmins can no longer read or understand the Brahminical philosophy, and the decomposition and asphyxia that followed all this materialism, Cartyle was driven by his disgust at the pettiness and the cant into the preachings of faith. In comparison with all this rottenness, any cheek, any cleansing, though by fire, seemed desirable and beautiful. He saw little difference in the gladiators or, quote, the causes, end quote, for which they combated. The one comfort was that they were all going speedily in the abyss together, and his imagination, finding no nutriment in any creation, avenged itself by celebrating the majestic beauty of the laws of decay. The necessities of mental structure force all minds into a few categories, and where impatience of the tricks of men makes nemesis amiable and builds altars to the negative deity, the inevitable recoil is to heroism on the gallantry of the private heart, which decks in its immolation with glory, and the unequal combat of will against fate. Wilkinson, the editor of Swedenborg, the annotator of Fourier, and champion of Hahnemann, has brought to metaphysics and to physiology a native Virgo with a Catholic perception of relations equal to the highest attempts and a rhetoric like the armory of the invincible knights of old. There is in the action of his mind a long Atlantic roll not known except in deepest waters, and only lacking what ought to accompany such powers, a manifest sensuality. If his mind does not rest in immovable biases, perhaps the orbit is larger and the return is not yet. But a master should inspire a confidence they will adhere to his convictions and give his present studies always the same high place. It would be easy to add exceptions to the limitary tone of English thought, and much more easy to adduce examples of excellence in particular veins. And if going out of the region of dogma, we pass into that of general culture, there is no end to the graces and amenities wit, sensibly and erudition of the learned class, but the artificial succor which marks all English performance appears in letters also. Much of their aesthetic production is antiquarian and manufactured, and literary reputations have been achieved by forcible men whose whose relation to literature was purely accidental, but who were driven by tastes and modes they found in vogue into their several careers. So at this moment, every ambitious young man studies geology. Some members of parliament are made and churchmen. The bias of Englishmen to practical skill has reacted on the national mind. They are incapable they are incapable of intuitility and respect the five mechanic powers even in their song. The voice of the modern muse has a slight hint of the steam whistle, and the poem is created as an ornament and finish of the monarchy, and by no means as the bird of a new morning which forgets the past world in the full enjoyment of that which is forming. They are with difficulty ideal. They are the most conditioned men, as if having the best conditions, they could not bring themselves to forfeit them. Every one of them is 1,000 years old and lives by his memory. And when you say this, they accept it as praise. Nothing comes to the bookshops but politics, travels, statistics, tabulation, and engineering. And even what is called philosophy and letters is mechanical and is structure. And if inspiration has ceased, as if no vast hope, no religion, no song of joy, no wisdom, no analogy existed anymore, the tone of colleges, the tone of colleges or colleagues and of scholars and of literary society has its mortal ear. I seem to walk on a marble floor where nothing will grow. They exert every variety of talent on a lower ground, and may be said to live and act in a sub-mind. They have lost all commanding views in literature, philosophy, and science. A good Englishman shuts himself out of three-fourths of his mind and confines himself to one-fourth. He has learned good sense, power of labor and logic, but a faith in the laws of the mind, like that of Archimedes, a belief like that of Euler and Kepler, that experience must follow and that lead the laws of the mind. A devotion to the theory of politics like that of Hooker and Milton and Harrington, the modern English mind repudiates. I fear the same fault lies in their science, since they have known how to make a repulsive and brief nature of its charm, though perhaps the complaint flies wider and the vice attaches to many more than to British physics. The eye of the naturalist must have a scope like nature itself, a susceptibility to all impressions, alive to the heart as well as to the door, as well as to the logic of creation. But English science puts humanity to the door. It wants the connection with which is the test of genius. The science is false by not being poetic. It isolates the reptile or mollusk. It assumes to explain, whilst reptile or mollusk only exists in system in relation. The poet only sees it as an inevitable step in the path of the creator. But in England, one hermit finds this fact, and another finds that, and lives and dies ignorant of its values. There are great exceptions of John Hunter, a man of ideas, perhaps of Robert Brown, the botanist, and of Richard Owen, who has imported into Britain the German homologies and enriched science with a contribution of his own, adding sometimes the divination of the old masters to the unbroken power of labor in the English mind. But for the most part, the natural science in England is out of its loyal alliance with morals, and is as void of imagination and free play of thought as conveyancing. It stands in strong contrast with the genius of the Germans, those semi-Greeks who love analogy, and by means of their height of view, preserve their enthusiasm and think for Europe. I'm going to end here. Please do feel free to share your thoughts, your insights, your feedback. Please leave your comments. At this point, it looks like Ralph Waldo Emerson is taking a sharp turn of criticism against the British scientists. We'll see where that leads. Please let me know what you think about it. Please leave your thoughts, your feedback, your insights, your comments. Please share in the comment section down below, and please smash that like or dislike button if that's your preference. And please feel ever so free as to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. And I want to thank you again for joining me as I read this amazing set of essays written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Keep on shining your beautiful light. I love you. Have a beautiful day.